Good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and bring this meeting to order. This is the police and fire bench plan meeting for June 17th. Let's go ahead and do roll call. Trustee Menon. Here. Trustee Kwan. Here. Trustee Santos. Yes. Trustee Votto. Here. Trustee Woosley. Here. Trustee Lee. Present. Trustee Flicker. Here. And myself, Trustee Gardner, is present. Trustee Gamapati is absent today. For orders of the day, we do have two certain items. We got item 4C, Iron, time turn of 9:10. And then also we have a time turn of 10 o'clock for item 4C, Gallagher. There is no sunshine to wave today. Is there any public comments? All right, no public comments. That'll bring us to the consent calendar. Is there anything that wants to be pulled on from the consent calendar for discussion? Motion to approve. If not, we got a motion by Santos. Second. Second by Woosley. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So since we are time certain in probably about 7 minutes, then we're going to go ahead and jump to 5.1, which is retirement. So 5.1 retirement. Donald J. Alexander II, fire captain, fire department, effective July 16th, 2026, with 25.12 years of service. Holger Blech, fire engineer, fire department, effective July 16th, 2026, with 25.11 years of service. Michael S. Brum, police officer, police department, effective July 2nd, 2026, with 28.79 years of service. Natus Cervantes, police officer, police department, effective August 1st, 2026, with 25.61 years of service. George Constantine, police sergeant, police department, effective June 20th, 2026, with 26.8 years of service. Richard Crawford, fire prevention inspector, fire department, effective July 18th, 2026, with 26.46 years of service. Pedro C. Franco, fire engineer, fire department, effective July 4th, 2026, with 31.69 years of service. Salvador Gutierrez, fire engineer, fire department, effective July 19th, 2026, with 25.57 years of service. Shad Hall, fire captain, fire department, effective July 4th, 2026, with 28.26 years of service with reciprocity. Mark I. Hofalden, police officer, police department, effective July 3rd, 2026, with 29.32 years of service. Tri H. Pham, police officer, police department, effective June 20th, 2026, with 24.48 years of service. Leo Prescott, police lieutenant, police department, effective June 19th, 2026, with 26.6 years of service. James K. Sitt, police officer, police department, effective July 5th, 2026, with 26.07 years of service. John Walsh, fire captain, fire department, effective July 16th, 2026, with 25.12 years of service. And also 5.2 deferred vested. You got Brent D. Marks, fire department, effective June 30th, 2026, with 28.72 years of service. So we need to get a motion. So for 5.1, got a motion by Santos. Second by Eshwar. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And then also for 5.2, deferred vested. I'll make a motion. Second by Santos. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Any comments?
Wish them all the best.
Thank Thank you, Dick. Yeah, for all the fire people, I've worked with all of them. They're all great individuals. They did long careers for us, Jose, and thank you for your service and best of luck in the retirement. And for the police day. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We'll go ahead and go to 6, death and survivorship notifications. Notification of the death of Victor Barnett, police sergeant, retired January 23rd, 2010, died April 24th, 2026. Survivorship benefits to Sharon Barnett, spouse. Notification of the death of Joseph D. Roberts, fire captain, retired July 15th, 2006, died February 25th, 2026. Survivorship benefits to Diana Roberts. Notification of the death of Stuart Townend, fire engineer, retired April 3rd, 1984, died April 25th, 6. No survivorship benefits. Notification of the death of James M. Walters, firefighter, retired January 9th, 1999, died April 24th, 2026. No survivorship benefits. At this moment, we'll take a moment of silence.
Yes, worked with all three of the firefighters, but special comment for Joe Roberts because he played the bagpipes for years and years and years. Volunteered for all the work and passing the firefighters, so really appreciate that.
Thank you. So we're 1 minute away. We'll go ahead and start transitioning to item 4C, discussion and presentation on emerging risk and reward changes with valuation approach by Chiron. We have Bill online.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
There we go.
Good morning, Bill.
Let me share my screen here. All right. So last August, I presented this idea about a split valuation as a methodology for facilitating a reduction in risk in your investment allocation. And we're about to start an asset liability study with Makita. And so I wanted to bring back this concept and idea and refresh it with the board, get some thoughts as we enter that process. So let's see here. So I kind of view the situation here as transitioning from our focus over the last 15 years or so. We were really focused on trying to recover from the Great Recession. The plan was 113% funded before the Great Recession and fell to 68% in 2009. And so the focus really has been restoring that funding. And we, at the last valuation, we were 88% funded. So we've come back substantially. And that's been through a combination of things from, the city driven cost controls, changes in assumptions. A lot of it is from increasing contributions, and there were also improvements to investment strategies. But now, as we're starting to approach 100% funded ratio, and the contribution rates in our projections are projected to decline significantly over the next several years, we think the focus is going to shift to preserving that funded status so that we don't repeat the experience of the last 15 or 20 years. And so as we start this asset liability study, we will be working directly with Makita. Makita is going to run the ALM study and propose the asset allocations and all of the investments. We'll provide the actuarial information that they need to run that study. Just verify that their projections are reasonably similar to our projections. And then we wanted to make sure that the risks to contributions and funded status are really analyzed and communicated. Because as we approach 100%, that risk reward for the investment returns changes. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that and then get into the split valuation. But before we do that, just a reminder of where we are from the last valuation. We were 88% funded, projected to increase and hit 100% around 2033, but really being in the 90s for a period of time because our contribution rates will drop and slow the change in the funded status. On the right-hand side, you can see the projected reduction in the UAL from year to year. And you can see where we cross that 100% threshold. You can see how much that changed from the 2024 projection. And so things are really improving for the plan and changing our outlook. If you look at our contribution rates, these totals are very high. These are the combination of the member and city. The member contribution rates are going up as we shift from tier 1 to tier 2 members who are contributing more. But if you look at just the city's contribution rates, they're still very high, but as a percent of payroll, they've been going down. The dollar amount went up about 4 million in the last valuation, and we're kind of projecting it to remain relatively level for a couple of years before it starts dropping. Here's just focusing in on what we're expecting for the next year. And so if we got a 6 5/8% return, which is our assumption, we'd expect the funded ratio to go from 88 to about 90%, and the city contribution rate to decline from 73 to 69.5%. Now, I'm not sure where the returns are as of today, but I think somewhere in the 10 or 11% range is where they were a short while ago. And that would cause our funded ratio to go up to 93% and have a similar reduction on the contribution rates. Now, the effect on the contribution rates gets phased in as we smooth those investment returns in. So, given those changes, there's a change in our risk reward profile. So with our plan, there's a minimum contribution rate equal to the normal cost. And as we cross 100%, then the contribution rates end up just equaling normal cost. And it doesn't matter how much over 100% we're funded, that contribution rate remains. And so if you look back at the 2020 valuation when we were only 74% funded, in our stochastic projections of all the outcomes, there was kind of an even balance between the green positive area and the blue negative area. So contributions were projected as a dollar amount to increase slightly over the next 5 or 6 years, but the range was relatively symmetrical, and even in some cases probably overweighted on the positive side, meaning there was more upside than downside on those rates. You move ahead to the 2025 valuation, and that green area has gotten much smaller. So the potential benefit of investment gains has gotten much smaller, while the potential pain from investment losses has become a much larger proportion of the projection. So you can think about this when you're below 100% funded. If we have a 5% loss, we're going to phase that loss in, and 5% is compared to our assumed rate of return of 6.625, so it'd be a 1.625% return. The impact on our contributions of a 5% loss gets phased in over 5 years. And so it would start just under 2% of pay, but after fully phasing in, would increase the contribution rates by about 8% of pay. But a 5% gain would do just the opposite. It would reduce our contribution rates from where they are, phased in over that 5-year period. Now, when we're 100% funded, that dynamic changes. The loss is still the same, but the gain doesn't get you anything in terms of contributions. The contributions remain the same. So when you're facing that, there's a natural inclination to look at potentially reducing the risk in the investment portfolio. And the standard approach would just be to change the asset allocation, moving down the efficient frontier to lower the risk, which then also lowers the expected return. It reduces the risk of any poor returns in those higher contributions, but it lowers the expected return, which, if that causes us to change the discount rate, that increases the normal cost, resulting in higher member and city contributions, which seems a bit counterproductive when you're over 100% funded. We want to get more conservative, perhaps, but probably not at the expense of increasing contributions in that scenario. So those trade-offs may not be attractive. And so the risk reduction, you'd have to look at how the risk reduction compared to the lower expected return, which is similar to what you're dealing with before you're 100% funded, except for slight differences in the consequences. So the split valuation approach is intended to allow the use of a more conservative asset allocation to stabilize the funding, preserve your funded status, without increasing the normal cost for member contribution rates. We also want to avoid some of the investment complexity of matching specific cash flows and make it easy to implement and to unwind. So if your funding level falls, you may want to unwind this approach and get back to the way you have been doing things. So the idea here is that you set a target funded ratio for the split valuation, and I'm going to just illustrate it at 100%. It doesn't have to be at 100%, but then any assets above that target are used to pay for the lower returns on a high quality fixed income portfolio of securities. And we would be working directly with the investment consultant to develop that. So here in the chart, we're using an example, assuming you're about 105% funded instead of where you are today. And so the actuarial liability is 6.3 billion. The assets are over 6.6 billion. And in a single valuation, we would end up with a contribution equal to the normal cost that's split between members in the city. In the split valuation, what we're suggesting is you take that surplus amount, the amount right here, about 317 million, and you use that to buy a matching portfolio and pay for the difference in expected return between the matching portfolio and the 6.625. Now here for this example, I used 5.6% for the matching portfolio return. And that's based on a AA high quality bond index as of last year. So the actual numbers would be different if you did something like this. But buying down from the 6.625 to 5.6, that 300 million could actually be used to purchase 2.9 billion in assets in that high quality fixed income portfolio to match a portion of the retiree liability. Then what remains is still invested in your diversified portfolio, 3.7 billion. And we split the actuarial liability accordingly. What's actually happened here is we've increased the actuarial liability. And in this example, we've done it perfectly so that it exactly matches the assets you have. And we've done that by valuing a portion at 5.6 and a portion at 6.625. And so your portfolio would be split between the 3.7 in the current portfolio and 2.9 in the matching. Here are some numbers behind it, behind this example. So you can see the funded ratio starts at 105%. Notice that the average normal cost rate for the plan across both tiers is 35.8% currently. Now, if we just did that same de-risking and valued it in a single valuation as it's currently done, the funded ratio would be 100%. Our combined discount rate would be about 6.26. But that means the normal cost would jump up from the 35.8 to 39.38. That causes the increase in the member and the city contributions. By doing the split approach, we're taking retiree benefit payments and matching up with the fixed income portfolio. So that portion is valued at 5.6 and it's 100% funded. And because it's just retiree benefit payments, there is no normal cost associated with it. Then in the diversified portfolio, we keep the 6.625%. It is also 100% funded, but it has all the actives. And so the normal cost rate stays at 35.8, and there's no increase in the contributions. Now, what does this get you going forward? If you had a 10% investment loss, because we were 105% funded, that 10% investment loss would cause a significant increase in contributions if we just continue along our current approach. But if you do it with the split valuation, you've moved a chunk of assets out of that diversified portfolio that does not incur that 10% investment loss. and just matches those benefit payments. And so the effect of that 10% loss is dramatically less on the portfolio. So my example has assumed that all of the assets in excess of 100% funded are used to buy down the interest rate for the matching portfolio. But that's just to make the example simple to understand. It doesn't have to be that way. You could start at 90%, you could wait till 110% to start doing something like this, or wherever the board would choose. And you don't have to use 100% of the assets over that trigger. You could use any percentage, such as 25 or 50, and we can explore the implications of that. And then when the diversified portfolio suffers a loss, in the example, I assumed that the matching portfolio was unwound and reverted to the diversified portfolio, but you could actually exercise a choice there of whether you kept the matching portfolio as it was or reverted, and that might depend on what happened with interest rates and the value of the matching portfolio. So this approach does add some complications. We need the matching portfolio to be in place on the valuation date, which requires some estimating. It won't come out as perfectly as it was in my example. There's an additional cost for that high quality fixed income portfolio, and that additional cost depends on what current interest rates are. So when interest rates are high, this becomes a very effective approach, but when interest rates are low, it's much more expensive. The decisions on expanding the matching portfolio are set up really by those parameters I was discussing and can be built into the policy, but then making a decision to unwind all or a portion of the matching portfolio is really an investment decision that would have to be made. There are some other complications we'll need to explore. What if all the higher than expected returns came from illiquid assets? That could end up under the policy pushing a lot more money into the matching portfolio, which would come from your liquid assets and not the illiquid. And so that could upset your asset allocation in the diversified portfolio. And then there are some actuarial complications. I don't think they're extensive here. Under GASB 67 and 68, we have to report a single equivalent discount rate. So that number would change every year and wouldn't exactly match what we're reporting in the funding valuation. And we want to make sure that this change would not be affecting actuarial equivalence or any other implications. So we'd want to make sure there's some legal review on some of those things before we proceed. So that was a lot of information, but I'll take any questions, and this is meant to be the primer for a discussion that continues.
Bill, I think we got a couple questions.
Sure. I have two that are probably sort of related that I'll start with. First is, how is the matching portfolio discount rate set annually? And then secondly, because that'll flow into the second question, regarding GASB 67, 68, my cursory understanding of it is that difference between our funding valuation and our financial statements valuation could trigger an audit. Have we talked to the auditors about this at all? By the way, I think this is a fabulous idea. I just want to make sure we have I's dotted, T's crossed.
Right. So on the first question, and this is something I want to work through with Makita and make sure it works in our coordination. My thought is that we would give them a projection for the end of the year on the liability side, and that would, based on the asset level, give them a budget for purchasing bonds. And they would then purchase the high quality fixed income portfolio using that budget, and the return, the interest rate on that portfolio would just be the yield on that portfolio, whatever it was. And so we would subtract from our valuation the cash flows that match the portfolio they purchased. And so it will automatically be 100% funded, but that interest rate will just depend on what bonds were actually purchased. So then on the GASB side, there's the triggering of an issue has really been because using a different discount rate on GASB than on your funding indicates that your funding is inadequate. Here, I think we have something completely different where we're saying in funding, we're saying we're using 6.625 for part of the portfolio. And in my example, 5.6 for another part. And so the GASB discount rate ends up being 6.26. We can talk with the auditors, but I really do not believe that will be an issue.
Hey, Bill, thank you for the presentation. So you said 105% funded, so that's at a future date, right?
That was just for the example to illustrate how the process would work.
Right, but would we make the switch when we reach that 105% funded, or we make the switch, like maybe start of next fiscal year?
Well, so you could set the trigger point at 100% funded. You could set it at 90% funded. You could set it at 110%. But it would be, you would start the process whenever you crossed that trigger point that the board sets. Now, the other piece was I used all of the assets above the 100% to create the matching portfolio, which put like 40% of your assets into a matching portfolio. I don't actually expect you to just on one day suddenly shift 40% of your assets to a matching portfolio. I think we'd want something that was more gradual in moving things along. And I think that's part of what we would want to study with Makita as a part of the asset liability study. So that's why I was putting in here that you may want to just use a smaller percentage than all of the assets above your trigger, but you could set the trigger at 90%, in which case you'd start, if your returns come in where we think they are, you'd start doing it next year.
So let's say we set it at 95%, then these numbers will be different. I mean, on the 105% that you have.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think in your example, I guess my big concern would be the numbers are big, right? I mean, you know, kind of like half the portfolio. And I think for any kind of investment projections, when you make that big changes, I'm always worried there are unintended consequences that we haven't thought about. So that would be kind of a concern. And I guess in terms of how Jay and his team manages it, I mean, that if you set up like half your portfolio separately, that makes big changes to how you manage. But I guess to the extent you're saying these would be gradual changes, that would make more sense. I mean,
Yeah. So I want to emphasize that it was an example to illustrate what the concept does. But we can change the parameters so that we don't, because I agree with you, it would create concerns if you are just suddenly moving 40% of your portfolio. And I don't think that's the intent here at all. It's to create more of a gradual process to move you towards that direction.
And I think when we get Makita involved, for Jay also, I guess trying to understand the risks. I mean, without having thought about it a lot, I would think maybe a situation where you have much higher inflation creates a lot of risk to that fixed income portfolio, which is now a much bigger chunk of, our total pool.
Well,
but I think understanding the risks would be very important, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is it's not just a fixed income portfolio, it's a portfolio that is matching certain benefit payment cash flows. And so the issue with it going forward is not so much the return that may be driven by interest rates and inflation as any defaults in that portfolio. Because as long as the bonds exist, their cash flows will continue to match those benefit payment cash flows. And so you almost, as long as you keep it as a matching portfolio and don't unwind it, you almost don't care what the investment return is. You do care about defaults on those bonds. So
Except you go through, let's say, a 5-year period, the inflation is running 5%. My guess is that the members would expect your COLA adjustments to be high, right? Then what our projections are today?
Well, but the COLA adjustments are fixed at 3%. So you'd have to have a change in the plan terms to do that. What you would see is, impacts on your actives, especially through salary increases. But the actives are all covered by the diversified portfolio.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
The way you presented this with the trigger point, it seems like it's an on or off strategy. In my mind, I always thought that, preserving funded status is more of a transition. So, at a high level, the way I think about it, we're moving the overall portfolio more toward fixed income sort of mix. I mean, I don't think that has to be done like at a single point in time. I think we could transition smoothly or continuously over time as funding status gets up there. Is that a fair statement, or am I totally wrong in that assumption?
No, I completely agree with that. So
okay, yeah.
The example shows a stark change, but you would not get there overnight. I think if we actually implemented this, you would be moving much more gradually. But in order to do that, I think you would not want to use all of the assets above the trigger to make the change, and you might want to start it below 100%.
Right. In some sense, the way I think about our portfolio right now, I mean, we have a dedicated cash flow, a certain percentage, I don't remember what number it is, that matches our liability benefit payments. So my thinking is that as we get closer to 100% funding, we're going to increase the allocation to that dedicated cash flow. And I guess you could frame it in the discussion as a trigger point or whatnot, but I rather think of it as a transition, and maybe we could do it. Maybe the question is, can we do it like over time? Or let's say we're 90, maybe you could present some scenarios where, okay, if you're 90, this is kind of an ideal starting point to get to where we want to be. And then over the next couple of years, hopefully as our funded status gets close to 100%, we would eventually get to where you are at with your example that you have here in the slides. Would that be, and then again, a good assumption?
Yeah, I think that's the direction we'll want to explore exactly how the policy drives that. We'll need to set those parameters. The one thing I want to clarify is your current matching is for, as I understand it, I think it's 3 to 5 years of the net cash flow. So it's the benefit payments less our expected contributions during that period. And as I understand it, the primary purpose there is to preserve the liquidity so that it doesn't affect the other parts of the portfolio. The purpose here goes beyond that, preserving liquidity, but it is using the same mechanism, just extending it further. And in my example here, I'm using AA corporate bonds for that. You're currently, I believe, using treasuries for that dedicated portion of the portfolio.
Thank you. Two questions. One is, you mentioned 3 to 5 years is our current expected liquidity for retiree payments. And if you change to this, how long are you assuming you want to have in that split value, or in the one that's paying our obligations? How much money are you putting away to pay for how long on those liabilities?
Well, so Jay can confirm the first point, whether it's 3 or 5 years. But in this, I'm not specifying exactly what time period it has to be. My thought would be that would be sort of an investment decision that would be looking at the yield curve at the time, and maybe you want to go long on the yield curve, maybe you want to go short. It just has to match some retiree benefit payments that are projected in our valuation.
And then the second question is, if we wanted to move forward with something like this, what are the logistics of that? Do you need a change to the investment policy statement, just direction to the investment team? How does that work logistically?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination on the investment side and the actuarial side. And so we're not asking you to make a decision to implement that now. We wanted to kind of elevate this concept and get you thinking about it as we run through the study. We'll be coming back with recommendations for both the investment side and the actuarial side, if this is a direction to pursue.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, Chair, would you mind if I ask a couple questions here? Thank you, Bill. And as for all the trustees too, I appreciate your patience here. I want to help out and add a little bit of context here. We asked Bill to reintroduce this idea here because of this pending asset liability study. And for those of you who took time to dig into some of Bill's fabulous charts, you'll notice, right, that sponsor contribution falls off markedly in that 3 to 5 year time frame. That coincides with the frequency that we're supposed to be conducting this asset liability study. So that's why this is a potentially pretty monumental exercise for the plan to conduct right now this year. I would also add that our return estimates are coming in a little bit higher than 11%. So that 90% funded on a market value basis, we could be on plastic. We're going to be hopefully a tick higher than that. And so considering these different triggers, the decision point might come sooner than we expect. So you all have had some fabulous ideas around those proposals here, and I want to make clear that when we do this asset liability study, there's going to be a range of recommendations, right? A range of possibilities for discussion. both in actuarial approach, as well as the strategic asset allocation that results from that. Some of these approaches involve an endpoint that are markedly different than our current portfolio, and there's no intention at all to go from what we're at today to some, kind of new and novel tomorrow. Right? It's going to be in that 3 to 5 year time period where we take a incremental step every year, probably, to get to some destination 3 to 5 years out. That's again one of the reasons we want to start now and have a little bit of foresight here. One of those possibilities is, as Trustee Kwan suggests, just incrementally increasing the hedging period of our existing immunized net cash flow allocation to kind of increase that hedging term, which would increase the weight to short duration fixed income, would down risk that way. I think some of Bill's charts earlier addressed the idea that, hey, if you're turning down the risk in the portfolio, maybe the commensurate risk, you're changing the discount rate, and that creates a problem that he's trying to solve with the split valuation. And so we wanted to reintroduce the idea of split valuation here and see how actuarially we might solve this issue of simultaneously turning down risk in the portfolio without affecting the sponsor's contribution path. So maybe a question for Bill. Back to the mechanics here. There's a note on the matching portfolio that I guess you say it doesn't really matter what the return on the matching portfolio is. And I'm guessing, or I'm assuming that's because you changed the discount rate to kind of immunize, for lack of a better word, to remove the losses from that portfolio. I'm wondering if you could help the board walk through a situation where there was some kind of matching portfolio, and we did happen, because of inflation or whatever rising yield environment, if that cash flow matching portfolio actually lost money, what are the mechanics that would occur, and how would the resulting UAL layer over the whole plan, how would that mechanically be different than the current situation now?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter as long as it remains the matching portfolio. So let's just assume you have a very simple matching portfolio where you are matching, a $10,000 cash flow 5 years from now. If interest rates go up, the value of that portfolio is going to go down, but it's still going to be set to match that $10,000 cash flow in the future. And so the fact that the value went down does not really impact you as long as that stays in the matching portfolio. Now, the expected return after that value goes down is going to go up because you have the higher interest rates. And so effectively the expected return on that matching portfolio is going to fluctuate in the opposite direction of the actual return on that portfolio, so that it is always 100% funded on that $10,000 cash flow in the future until it's paid. And so the risk is if there's a default on that bond, then you no longer have it matching. So that's the piece you want to focus on with the matching portfolio. And I'm sure Makita can get into that in much more depth than I am here, but that's the high level concept. And so it's only if you want to unwind the matching portfolio and put it back in the diversified portfolio that then the current market value of the matching portfolio matters.
Can I clarify that? So let's say for 3 years we run inflation at 5%, right? And let's say we set up the matching portfolio for 10 years. Now, is there no risk that that expected liability changes after 3 years relative to what the expectation is today? Because inflation is running higher, and maybe that future pension payment will increase, or am I getting this wrong?
But
No,
correct.
I think more-
Because we're only looking at current retiree benefit payments, those are fixed with a 3% increase, and it doesn't matter what inflation does. Those benefits increase at 3% per year. And so the piece we're matching does not change.
I guess one follow-up for me before I let the trustees jump back in here. So I understand how if we're matching from the beginning and then there's a change in the yields, the asset side and the liability side will change in offsetting ways. But for actuarial purposes, only the asset side is on, in our portfolio, and we're held relative to the 65 days discount rate. So if and I think this is the heart of your proposal as well. How does the fact that we're liability matching or matching up to that set of liabilities, how does that differ in the mechanics of creating UAL layers going forward? If our asset side, changes because of rising yields and we lose money in the asset portfolio, sure, that's offset by a higher discount rate on the liability side as well. Except public plan land is the trustees that set the discount rate. Are you saying for the matching portfolio, they change the discount rate so that it negates any changes in the matching portfolio?
Yes. So the discount rate for the matching portfolio is going to be the yield on the matching portfolio. So it will change every year. The diversified portfolio won't change. So the gains and losses in the diversified portfolio will flow through just like they always do. But in the matching portfolio, the discount rate is going to change to match the yield. And so the liability in the matching portfolio and the assets in the matching portfolio will always be the same.
You mind, David?
I already spoke.
Okay.
I'll speak after.
No, yeah. I just want to say I think this is the right time to do the ALM or ALS since we haven't done it before, and also I do like the split valuation model. However, I think we should, as Trustee Menon and others have said, I think we should look at I don't know risks, but I think the challenges on unwinding the matching portfolio if interest rates move, and that's going to impact the active members. I think we should have that built into or addressed in our policies or governance, because I don't think it's obvious that we can start, moving levers quickly if we need to make a change. And then my other question, Bill, is with your clients that have gone through this study with Makita and historically with different interest rate environments, have you seen them make that switch or seen them make that adjustment, and how have they done that historically?
So no, what I didn't have the caveats in this presentation that I did last year, but I've only presented this to a few clients and no one has implemented it yet. But several of them, or a few of them, are looking at it as they approach 100% with varying levels of interest. But many of the California systems are starting to face this issue where their minimum contribution is equal to the normal cost rate. And so as they approach 100%, they've got this dynamic to address.
Thank you.
Right, we'll go back to David and then Gretchen.
Yeah. Bill, I was about to say or ask, whether this is a industry best practice. You pretty much that question before I even asked it. But well, maybe you can comment on it. That was my first question. I have a follow-up.
So this is a new idea that has not taken hold. I have presented it in a number of different forums and run it by actuaries from other firms, top actuaries that I work with within the profession. I know Jonathan Camp, the Makita actuary, has only had a very high level introduction to it. So I'm actually looking forward to getting his feedback and going much deeper on it. And his understanding of the investment side is far beyond mine. So understanding any risks or shortcomings with it, it's been run through Chiron to really to all of our consulting level actuaries. So it's not something that you could label best practice today. I kind of hope that going forward, it does become something that you would label as best practice, but it has not really been done. So it is a new idea that's just designed to solve this issue about the increase in the normal cost rate if you reduce the risk in the portfolio.
Okay, thank you for that. So my following question, or question / comment, is that, and this is based on my experience, and maybe it's anecdotal, but when I worked with other pension plans in the past, we always talk to when I talk to them about this topic about asset liability management. The focus was always trying to minimize the risk between our investment portfolio and the set of liabilities. So when you're looking at the risk, we're always talking about active risk in absolute sense, but I think the more appropriate risk to look at is the risk of our portfolio relative to a set of liabilities we have. And if you really want to minimize the risk of our portfolio relative to a set of liabilities, you're going to start to have more fixed income securities in your portfolio. So in my mind, you're trying to kind of get us to start thinking about moving in that direction. I mean, assuming that's what you're trying to do here. And if that's the case, I'm 100% supportive of this exercise where you're doing a study to kind of figure out where we should be as we get closer to 100% funding. Now, again, is that a fair statement, or am I off base again?
No, I think that's fair. I think the notion here is rather than looking at matching all of your liabilities, focusing at least at the start on matching the retiree liability. Now, for you, that's 70% of the liability of the plan is for people currently receiving benefits. So it's a substantial part of your liability. But letting the portion certainly that actives represent still have the greater investment risk with the greater expected return to manage the growth in those liabilities and expectations. But once they retire, those things are fixed. And we've shown for this plan how sensitive you are to investment returns, and that's largely because of the size of the retiree liability compared to the active liability and compared to the active payroll that has to fund those benefits. And so this is a way to focus on using that matching to reduce those risks and preserve your funded status.
Bill, I think that's a great comment. That we have to think about risks more broadly with this, because the risks of contributions from participants as well as the city are real, even if harder to manage in an asset liability study. But going back to the matching portfolio, you mentioned the risk of defaults in there. Based on how I'm understanding that matching portfolio, the setting the discount rate to the yield of the portfolio also really only works if we're holding all the bonds in the matching portfolio to their maturity, correct? So if we have to
Correct.
sell them. Okay.
Now that's correct, but for valuation purposes, we're only looking at it once a year. And
Yeah.
so we are assuming you are holding those bonds to maturity. But if you decide not to, we just make the adjustment in the next valuation.
And I guess that, back to my auditor question earlier, not to beat a dead horse here, but that constantly changing the discount rate every year and knowing that this is something new in the marketplace, just making sure that we are not setting ourselves another risk to look at for us far, that we're not setting ourselves up for trouble, that someone's going to say what we're doing is wrong, or illegal against industry, against IRS standards.
Yeah, well, so you're not subject to most of those IRS standards, but it would be important to communicate to the auditors. I would also be happy to reach out to S&P's actuary to run the concept by him, but from what I know about him, he would probably fully endorse this type of approach because they're much more concerned about the risks that pension plans are taking. So I think we could do some exploration on that front that we have not done, but I suspect the rating agencies and auditors, once they were introduced to it, would be on board with it. Now, there is a risk that we don't get the communications right with them up front, and they have a hard time digesting what it is when they first look at it.
Is there an action item here, or what do we?
No, there's no action.
Okay.
This is reintroducing from a year ago presentation and helping us start thinking about this process as we get closer to fully funded, and also to bring our attention that, we will be kicking off the ALM study. And maybe Jay could comment on what was the timeline that for the AML study and the next steps.
Yeah, great question. So we had originally set this up as a 3 to 4 month process. Asset liability study itself could take a meeting and a half. Pretty significant board commitment. So I wouldn't be asking for your time unless this was important. But this is strategic asset allocation, and we're at that kind of inflection point for the plan. So we had originally thought about reintroducing this actuarial idea today's board meeting. You have next month off, which gives you time to do some homework and think about this during that summer break, so that when we get back, our next meeting would be the August board meeting. So at the August board meeting, we have the full-on asset liability study presented by Guido with Chiron's help into the inputs. At the end of that meeting, I penciled out presenting some asset allocation mixes for you all to consider without taking a vote yet. Because the week after that board meeting, we're going to walk into the IC meeting. And at the IC meeting, that's where we have some in-depth kicking around of the different asset allocation mixes. Hopefully, there's enough robust discussion and thought through that time period such that the IC can coalesce around some kind of option and make a recommendation back to the full board for the September meeting. And in September, you all would, you would have had this presentation today. You'd have July to think about it. Another follow-up presentation with the asset liability study in August. And in September, you would have as well the IC's recommendation around strategic asset allocation mix. So 4 months of calendar time, 3 board meetings, and just really asking for John's indulgence here because it's a significant chunk of your attention.
But just, yeah, sure. So I think this is a great discussion and a good follow-up from the offsite. I do think that, on the lines of what Trustee Kwan said, I mean, and this is probably maybe what Jay you come up with, but maybe an incremental approach. We can do the split, but maybe 10%, right? And 10 and 90 rather than 40 and 60. So that kind of, gives us see how it's working out. And also caution that markets can go down. I mean, they don't just go up. And, we could be in the position of a 25% drawdown. Everything looks different. And having the flexibility there and risk the way we did before.
Thank you. There's no other question. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jay. That'll take us to our next agenda item, which is we're going to jump to item 4D, discussion and action on Gallagher's investment team compensation study.
I'll introduce this, and then I believe we have Georg online from Gallagher. So the boards may remember that we authorized this study to review and it was reviewed by the Joint Personnel Committee. The purpose is to give the boards an objective market assessment of ORS investment staff compensation, excluding the CIO position, and to support the ability to recruit and retain the specialized positions and that manage our complex investment program. Gallagher compared classifications against a California peer group set, both with and without calipers included. Today's discussion is about reviewing the analysis and hearing the recommendations from Gallagher. The action that the board should be considering while they're listening and participating in this discussion is that we're looking to provide next steps, and that those next steps include approval for the recommendations to be made to City Council on compensation adjustments for our investment classifications, as well as who will present those recommendations in coordination with the Fed board. So with that, Georg, are you online?
I'm here. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. And we're presenting your report. So if you just want to guide staff on how you want us to move through the report for you.
That sounds great. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Georg Kramer. I'm a managing director here at Gallagher, and I was part of the project team working on this particular project for your organization. We can trying to find the view though, so I can follow along. Yes. So let's. So what I was planning to do today was to walk you through our report findings and recommendations. I'll try to do it as swiftly as possible, of course, and then happy to answer any questions. So let's scroll past the cover page, keep going past the table of contents. On the executive summary, this gives you kind of like an overview, a broad overview of the study that we conducted. What the sort of the gist of the study is that we surveyed 8 other, we call them comparator or survey agencies, comprised of local government retirement systems within California, from cities and counties. So 7 of those agencies were such. And then in addition to that, we also surveyed CalPERS. We also identified 6 of the agency's classifications or jobs that we surveyed. We call those benchmark jobs, and those are the jobs we went out to survey in this identified market. As you just heard from John, we produced 2 data sets, and so in looking at the findings and market results, We produced one set with CalPERS as one of the comparator agencies and one without to understand the impact of CalPERS, recognizing, of course, that CalPERS is a very large organization and a large retirement system. And overall, what we found is that including CalPERS in the data set did not significantly impact the outcome. So that was certainly one finding. You'll see in one of the third paragraph from the bottom there that the overall results showed that when looking at the data, including CalPERS, and looking at just base salaries, we found that San Jose Retirement Services was approximately 7.9% below the market. And when we say market, we typically mean the market median. The market median, the median as a statistical value is the predominant market position that most of our clients look at. And we work with hundreds of public agencies throughout the state of California. So when Gallagher speaks of the market, we typically mean the median. So we looked at that for base salaries only. And then the second analysis included benefits for total compensation purposes and found that when we included those benefits, and that included cash supplements, retirement, deferred compensation, medical, dental, vision programs, and other benefits, it did not move the needle much. San Jose Retirement Services was then almost 8% below the market median. And that tells us that your benefits package is quite competitive with the market because you did not lose or gain much ground when we included the benefits in the analysis. We can probably move to the next page and look at the table there. You can see the individual results for each of the 6 positions that we surveyed. Of course, you can see right at the top there, a new or proposed position that we surveyed was the Retirement Deputy Chief Investment Officer. That position had, at the time of the survey, had not yet existed, but we understood, we had conversations about that particular body of work and role in the organization and surveyed that. As you can see in the second column, that gives you the number of job matches or data points we were able to obtain. Only 3 of the 8 survey agencies or comparative agencies had a match for this particular job. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute here. But when we in order to do any statistical analysis, we require at least 4 data points. So this particular job fell a little bit short of that. For the other 5 jobs we surveyed, again, you can see the number of job matches we found. And in the third column, you then see the percentage difference between San Jose Retirement System Services compensation and the market median. So as an example, the second job here, Retirement Investment Analyst 1, with 5 data points or 5 matches, came out about 7.5% below the market when looking at base salary only, and about 4.4% below market when looking at total compensation. So as you can see, there is some variance there when we look at each individual position. The earlier percentages I provided to you are when we look at all positions in an aggregate. So you can see some differences there from about 7.5% below market to 13.8% below market. The retirement investment officer we found came in slightly above market median, but a 1.5 percentage point is we really find to be competitive. So really being aligned with the market. And then for the senior investment officer, that came in about 15.8% below market. That's a little bit more significant below. And the final position, retirement investment operations supervisor, 3.6% below market. We usually find that a result of plus or minus 5% of the market, we find to be essentially competitive with the market. But as you can see, there are 3 positions we surveyed that we found to be not competitive with the market because they are more than 5% below the market. The second table that you can see there would just be the recommendations that we would make for either salary range increases or decreases. In this case, you can see for the 5 positions where we had sufficient market data, we're recommending no change for 1, a 1 to 5% increase for 1. And then for the other 3 positions, we would recommend a salary range increase of more than 5%. And you'll see a bit more detail on that in the rest of the report. Can move through the next to the next page. So this is the executive summary. The following pages give you a lot more detail on our methodology, a little bit on the background of the organization. You obviously know this better than we do, so I'm not going to go over all of that. One of the things right here in the study methodology that's important to mention, of course, is the selection of comparator agencies. This section talks a little bit about the factors that you would normally look at when identifying what those agencies look like. We sometimes call them peer agencies. Of course, one of the most important aspects or factors is the organizational type and structure. Also, the services provided of course, as a retirement system, you are quite unique as a public agency. So of course it makes the most sense to survey other retirement systems, and it also makes sense to really confine the labor market to California, because of course California is a very unique labor market. The Bay Area and Silicon Valley, of course, are very unique labor markets. I should have maybe mentioned that I'm located in San Francisco, so I'm very well familiar with the Bay Area and all the different pockets of labor markets we have here. We can probably move on to the next page. So just again, a list here at the top of the 8 retirement systems that we surveyed: Alameda, Contra Costa, Los Angeles City, not the county, Orange County, San Bernardino, San Francisco, San Mateo, and then again, 2 data cuts with and without CalPERS. We should also mention, I may imagine that maybe CalPERS may sort of make someone pause as to why we would survey that agency, but it is a competitor. It is sort of the gorilla in the room, if you will, that is difficult to ignore. And I should also point out that when it comes to differences in size between 2 agencies, when we compare one agency to another, we certainly pay attention to that, especially when we compare positions at the management levels. And we take into account the fact that there are differences in size and potentially that management positions in organizations of different size have different levels of responsibility, different number of staff they're supervising, maybe a different level of visibility, the political nature of the job and so forth. All of that sort of grows with the size of the organization. And so when we make our comparisons, we absolutely take that into consideration. The more technical jobs that are sort of individual contributor types of jobs usually are not that much different between agencies of different size, but when we move into the management ranks, size certainly becomes a more critical factor that we include in our analysis. Real quick, there's 2 data sets here that are just listed out. I've already covered the first set that included CalPERS. The data set excluding CalPERS, what we found, as you can see, the base salaries remained just about the same, it's about 7.5% below the market, so a very small difference for base salaries. The total compensation results changed a little bit more, where San Jose fell more than 11% below the market compared to the earlier 8%. And what that tells us is the benefits package at CalPERS is actually less competitive than the other agencies, because that value, though those additional dollar values sort of drag down the market. And so this is just one observation. This is more of a reflection of CalPERS and less of a reflection of San Jose. And really, when it comes to these kinds of results where both base salaries and total compensation are below the market, and the fact that San Jose Retirement Service is directly tied to the city of San Jose, we would recommend focusing on base salaries mostly as a result of this survey, because we know there's less flexibility in what retirement services may be able to do on the benefit side. I think we can scroll through to the next page. Again, just a list of the benchmark classifications, a little bit more detail on all the different benefits that we surveyed. There are some that we include in the total compensation calculation. Those would be retirement, deferred compensation, health insurances. And then in addition to that, we also gather data on holidays, vacation accruals, administrative leave, personal leave, and some other additional pieces of information. We can keep scrolling. In terms of how we do the data collection and job matching, that's kind of the crux of any compensation study. We do a very detailed analysis of San Jose's job descriptions compared to the job descriptions of each of the comparator agencies. So it's not just looking at job titles, it's really looking at job descriptions, at duties and responsibilities, at minimum qualification requirements, levels of education, knowledge, skills, and abilities. We look at organizational charts and organizational hierarchy, decision-making authority, the level of independence with which the work is performed. So there's a lot that goes into, a lot of factors that go into this job analysis and comparison process. And our goal is to achieve at least a 70% match between two jobs. Knowing that no two jobs are ever going to be 100% exactly the same, we want to get to at least a 70% match. I will also tell you that that's not a mathematical calculation. It's really more of this job analysis, looking at all the factors that I just listed and then making an educated judgment call to say, yes, these two jobs are comparable. They're not exactly the same, but they're sufficiently similar to say, yes, this is a match. Let's keep scrolling, please. We can probably keep going. Just a little bit more information on, results and number of matches. I've really covered that. Again, the same table that you already saw, so we can keep scrolling past that as well. This, by the way, again, is with CalPERS and without CalPERS, so that you see two tables there. But let's keep scrolling. You'll see a little bit more information, other information we gathered from each agency. There was just interested in knowing a little bit more about how each agency manages their compensation systems and their salary ranges, how employees progress through the salary ranges, what kinds of performance-based bonuses, if any, are provided. As you will see, that's often a very, there's a great level of interest in that piece, especially for investment positions, because of course, we know that in the private sector, those performance bonuses can be, obviously it can go into the millions of dollars, which as a public agency, we understand, of course, you can't compete with that. But one question we asked comparator agencies, was whether there was any performance-based bonuses, and really only two reported some type of incentive at CalPERS. There really is just a sort of a certification award system. So if employees obtain a certain certification, they get a 5% incentive or bonus. And the second system for San Francisco, only the chief executive officer, chief investment officer received a signing bonus. And that was only for the current CEO in the current position. So, and I can also tell you a couple of years ago, we did a much broader study of I believe, over 20 retirement systems in California, and only two of them still at that time also had anything incentive or bonus related. So it's still fortunately or unfortunately in the public sector, a rare occasion. We also asked some questions around recruitment and retention statistics. Not a lot of information there. While public agencies are usually quite forthcoming with data and information, some of these questions are sometimes a bit challenging for them to research, or it kind of sometimes gets into this space where they feel a little bit uncomfortable being too forthcoming. So not a huge number of data points for that particular question. Let's get to the recommendations. So in terms of recommendations, really, I guess we can get right to kind of tagging on to what I was just talking about in terms of focusing on base salaries. What would Gallagher recommend? We understand, of course, there are you're working within the parameters of the city of San Jose's compensation system and salary ranges and range structures. But we did provide, if you scroll down a little bit more, we did provide a salary range recommendation for each position that we surveyed, essentially recommending aligning each position with the market median from our survey and identifying the pay range in the city's structure that is closest to the market median. It may not be exact, and that's quite common because salary ranges have structure. There are certain differentials between ranges and steps and things of that nature. So most of our clients aren't able to hit exactly that market median, but usually identify the range in the structure, the grade in the structure that's closest to the market median. So we're recommending that for all positions, except if you scroll a little bit further for the retirement deputy chief investment officer there at the bottom. Because we did not find sufficient market data, we would recommend an internal alignment, and that is also very common between the deputy chief investment officer and the highest level classification that position manages, which in this case is the senior retirement investment officer. So placing the deputy chief investment officer 15% above that would still create a sufficient differential between the deputy and the chief investment officer. So when we look at internal relationships, we want to be sure we're not creating any compaction issues. So we did also take that into consideration. And then finally, one final question we were asked to explore was a comparison between the city's, we call it a classification review, between the city's investment officer classification and the retirement investment officer classification. Those two classifications actually used to be one, but were separated. I think it was about 2012, where the retirement investment officer was established and sort of pulled out from the investment officer. And the bottom line of our findings is that that the retirement investment officer is much more focused on investment specific duties, whereas the investment officer classification has other financial related duties in the job description. And the minimum qualification requirements in terms of education and knowledge, skills, and abilities are a bit more specific for the retirement investment officer. So we did find a distinction. It wasn't a huge distinction, but certainly a distinction or distinguishing characteristics that we were able to identify. I think if we scroll down, that may be the last part of the report. That just goes into all the components of both job descriptions that we analyzed and compared. It's very detailed, so I'm not going to bore the board with all of the detail today. Yes, that's really the conclusion here. So again, you in the report, you'll see all the details, methodology, findings, and recommendations. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Georg, for going through that in detail. Just one question for the board. The effective dates of the comparisons, I think that's important to put that in a time frame.
Yes, thank you for that question. All of the surveying and all of the data is pre-January 1st, 2026. And that is important because, of course, with the first of the year, there are changes in benefits and premiums and sometimes salaries. I'm sure you all know that most public agencies provide COLA increases in July, but every now and then we see an agency that does something off cycle. So it's always important to select and agree upon a particular snapshot in time because, of course, the market continues to move. And that sort of cutoff date is important so that all the data is consistent all throughout the study.
Thank you. And then also, I think it's important for the trustees to know, we're not talking about actual compensation, what one of our investment officers is currently being paid. We're talking about the range for the classification, and their pay would be somewhere between the bottom and the top of that pay range. And what this recommendation is that we're formulating is to move that pay range, not to actually move salary, right? So salaries are moved through agreements with the city, as well as MPP processes, depending, assuming their management or Unit 99. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shifting the ranges here. And I think it's important to note that a new Unit 99 proposal has been placed and currently proposed to be 3% over the next each of the next 3 years. So that is also not included in this analysis. Although if you do look at the detailed charts that are provided by Gallagher, there was a question that was put out to the peer groups to identify those who knew what the projected changes would be, and a handful of them said unknown, like we would have said if we were asked back in January. But there are some in there that do have some indication of what their future increases will be.
So we'll go ahead and open this up for any questions for Gallagher. The JPC also did discuss this at length too. So.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for the excellent work, and I think the recommendations make sense to me.
Thank you, sure.
Yeah, well, thank you, Georg, for the presentation. John, just to clarify, you said it was a shifting of the pay range as opposed to proposing to the city any kind of changes in the city-wide compensation
Correct.
program.
Correct. So there would be no budgetary impact by making this recommendation, or the city accepting this recommendation in the current year. You can understand that anyone who's at the top end of their range today, there would be additional compounding effects going forward. But those are, running some analysis across what could be would show that it's an extremely minor impact across the cost of our budget, or impact against our budget for the cost of these changes, to the tune of thousands of dollars over 5 years, as compared to the total compensation of the organization. It's very small.
Okay, thank you. And maybe from the city's point of view, maybe George may have, is this going to be presented in any way to the city as sort of the beginnings of an education about compensation for investment team? Or I don't know.
So I'll jump in. So the process that we followed last time, and it could change, is both boards would meet with their council liaisons, bring them up to speed, try and get them supportive. We'll talk to OER about this compensation study. We'll get it on the city council's agenda. There'll probably be maybe a 5-minute presentation of the highlights of the study and how we came to these conclusions and recommendations. And then city council will vote on if they agree or disagree with the recommendations.
Okay. All right, great. And only because I'm thinking ahead, and this is an older discussion we've had about compensation for the investment team, that compared to our peers, that's one level of comp. And then there's also compared to the industry as a whole. I know that's a big ask and probably not the right time in terms of circumstances, but I can see this as part of a warming up process, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Howard.
They take a look at the total compensation.
The JPC talked about that, and we were going to just focus on just the salary and not total compensation. The total compensation is negotiated by the bargaining groups, and
That has an effect on your group.
true, it does.
It does.
But also, it did say, the study did show that there wasn't much of a difference. Our total comp is in alignment with our
our peer group. And so there was a less than a 5% delta, which they said was in normal range.
And just for, I guess, background, that's probably because of the PEPRA. Most of these agencies are going to be in CalPERS, and when Tier 2 came about, even the charter cities such as San Jose, probably 37 acts, I would assume too, would have a comparable type of compensation package in Tier 2.
Any other questions, comments? If not, there are some actions. We need to approve the study and recommendation. Also, we need to, my understanding sounds like we need a point. Yeah, or do we let the JPC do that?
The boards could defer to the JPC if they'd like.
So we need those two actions, items for this topic.
Motion to accept the study.
All right, I got a first by Franco, a second by Woosley. Any further discussion on the acceptance of these recommendations? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so now we need a recommendation on who is going to go to, I guess, City Council. If we want to select somebody, or we just let the JPC select. And JPC doesn't, I don't think it has any meeting plan at the moment.
Tentatively scheduled in August.
Okay.
Well, I think the chair would be appropriate.
I agree.
So that's a motion by Santos, second by Eshwar. Any other comment, recommendations? Anybody else volunteers? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, so we're at 10:30. We got a heavy investment discussion with all the quarterly reports. You will need a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Yeah, please. All right. We'll reconvene at 10:45. All right, everybody, thank you. Welcome back. Let's go ahead and get back onto the agenda. So we're back to 2A. Oral update by our CIO, Juan.
Thank you, Chair. We're just a couple weeks away from the end of the fiscal year, less than 10 trading days. And so I'm happy to report that our estimated returns as provided by Makita exceed our 65 days discount rate by a pretty healthy margin. And so the fiscal year to date returns through Tuesday, 6/16 for the pension, estimated at 13.4% versus a benchmark of 14.5%. And for the healthcare trust, estimated at 18.7% versus a benchmark of 18.4%. And that again, estimated for Tuesday, 6/16. So we heard from Chiron earlier this morning that with those at those levels, and we'll probably be at a market value basis, the pension will be valued at over 90% funded. And as Bill has noted before, right, as funding level increases, there's all sorts of reasons to be more risk cognizant, right? The plan becomes more sensitive returns. When you have more money, you have more money at risk. And so that's the impetus for this whole asset liability study. That makes it an ideal time, actually, to re-underwrite the plan's willingness and ability to take investment risk. And we're going to do that by conducting this study. We've conducted parts of asset liability studies just about every year. And certainly we did that recently this spring when we've updated our asset allocation for new capital market assumptions. But, to be frank, I can't remember the last time we did a kind of soup to nuts, formal, comprehensive asset liability study. So can't tell, I'm super excited. I'm sure you all are going to be super excited too, because this is one of the more weighty and important topics to consider. For today's meeting, we've got our quarterly set of reports from Neuberger and Makita, the greatest hits, as well as a resolution that Ron's going to report on to revise the IPS to reflect the multi-sector bond allocation change that we made last meeting. So before we get into all of that, though, I also wanted to give Christina a couple of minutes with your indulgence to run through some updates on the public equity portfolio. There's been a few redemptions, and she'll just give you a short summary of the movement within that allocation.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everyone. Like Jay mentioned, I would like to give an update on our public equity portfolio movements recently. So we terminated our 2 global managers and also 2 large cap international managers. The termination of the global strategies was driven by a few considerations. One, the first is the underperformance of the growth manager and its lack of exposure in the high growth space. And the second reason for the termination was that our value and growth blend worked well over time, so they're being complementary to each other. However, global equity in general has always been a very difficult space. According to a research done by RBK, only 26% of the large cap growth managers they outperform the benchmark. So it has been our view to have passive investments in the U.S. space, but global with 2/3 of the investments in the U.S. is equally challenging. And then also the reason for our allocation change is because our asset allocation has regional targets. So currently we have 23.5% in the US, 13% in international, and 5.5% in EM. So in the past, when we allowed global managers in our portfolio, we allow them to deviate from the benchmark. So that adds to regional and sector difference from the benchmark, which creates some unwanted tracking error to the best. We look aside from the re-underwriting of the growth manager in the portfolio, we explored multiple options. One is looking for a replacement of the growth manager to pair with our value manager. And the second one is looking for a more consistent core manager to hold the space. However, both approach failed because, again, growth is very difficult. And 2, for the core manager, we were not able to put them in the portfolio given legal and other constraints. So we also made some changes in the international equity space, terminated 2 large cap strategies, and also hired a new international core strategy. So the value manager in the international space, they have done well against the core benchmark. However, they lacked their value peers. So we strive for the best value of core managers in the space that leads to their termination. Another growth manager, their style hurt performance, and we were looking for some better replacements in the space. So we are in the process of restructuring the portfolio in the international space. And from our last IC meeting, we discussed the managers on watch list with our IC committee members. Unfortunately, as we get into the late market cycle, we continue to see some managers struggle. The reasons for their underperformance are more related to their style rather than stock picking. For example, from a recent conversation and study from Alpine Macro, momentum versus minimum for relative return is 5 sigma event, which makes our managers with lower beta, lower volatility, higher quality, and an embedded philosophy like urgency struggle in this type of environment. We spoke to the manager, we presented our thesis with the team internally, and also seek for advice from Makita. For our current recommendation is a hold. We will still watch the manager very closely and continuously test our thesis. And another area that I want to mention is emerging markets. Emerging markets this year is really driven by 3 stocks, and you probably heard from the media, TSMC, Samsung, and SK Hynix. The 3 stocks is now 27% of the index. And year to date, when we look at emerging markets, Infotech returned 93%. And MSCI emerging markets ex Asia Tech only returned negative 6.5%. And most of our managers, they have a more diversified portfolio relative to the index. So this put them in a very difficult environment to outperform the index. So we're closely monitoring the managers and engaging active conversations with the managers. They consistently position our portfolio, but we're not there yet. And also want to mention a slight overweight we've always had in our portfolio in India. India is less than 60%, 60 basis points of the total portfolio. It's a very small contribution to tracking based on our latest risk study. It's a long-term strategic allocation and it's facing some short-term headwinds. And despite the lack of performance, our thesis is that we still believe that the fundamentals are largely held up. And Taiwan and Korea are more currently benefiting from a concentrated tech cycle, but India's thesis is broader and more internally generated. And looking at long-term horizon, we believe India's growth is more durable in the emerging market space. So for now, we held on to our India country exposure we have in the portfolio. So in response to the current challenging performance environment, what have we done? We have intensified our oversight of external managers. Our engagement framework includes our quarterly performance reviews with the managers, ad hoc discussions with portfolio managers, and targeted inquiries into relative positioning and forward-looking investment theses. To ensure a robust decision-making process, we are synthesizing independent analysis from Nikita in terms of manager monitoring and with Veris on their risk positioning, and also Neuberger Berman, who advise on our private equity portfolio, but also they have a really good portfolio analytics tool, which we leverage, and also peer plans on their experience and observation of the market. And also, I want to thank our board. We've had constructive discussions at our last IC, and then follow-up meetings with Trustee Manning and Trustee Kwan, who provided valuable insights into our process and fraud market and approach to active management. We appreciate the support of the board. So this multi-dimensional approach ensures that every decision regarding our manager lineup is data-driven instead of just by sentiment, and aligned with our long-term strategic objectives of the plan. So this is a brief update, and happy to take any questions.
There you go.
So thank you, Christina. And I know as somebody who's been in the public equity space for 30 years, that this is particularly a very challenging environment. I think you've gone through multiple years where you have a narrow group of stocks that have worked. You had the Max 7, and then more recently anything AI related and anything which semiconductor related, right? And, the last 6 months, talked about Samsung and Hynix. And I think most active managers would exercise the prudence in terms of how they construct portfolios. And if you do that, you're going to underperform. And that doesn't mean you need to change it. I recall going back a year or 18 months ago when public equity was outperforming across the board. So I think you're doing all the right things in terms of reviewing, what maybe hasn't worked and whether we should change things. It doesn't mean that you need to change wholesale because, I think exercising the prudence and your fiduciary responsibilities means that you stay the course in terms of, many of the managers who I think are excellent managers. So thank you for the update.
Yeah.
Hey, Christina, thank you very much for that update and overview. A lot of good, I think, ideas, and I think it was very thoughtful. And I also want to mention that you have to stick to the strategy and you have to stick to the investment style of your managers. And I think that's what you're doing. And the fact that at the end of the day, this is long term. So it's not a matter of, as we discussed at the IC, making changes, every quarter where, you have to, you see it through based upon what we think is the strategy, what makes the most sense. So it was well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. So that takes us to 4B, presentation on private equity by Neuberger.
Good morning. We have Casey from Neuberger on the line, and I'll be helping share screen as she presents.
Thank you, Dinesh. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me. I know you've had a laundry list of presentations this morning, so we always appreciate the opportunity to present. I am going to go through the Q4 2025 portfolio presentation and performance overview. You'll recognize page 2, which is a high-level overview of performance for your private equity portfolio, focusing on the 2 middle columns, which are your more recent private equity investments through the and in partnership with Neuberger. Series 1 and Series 2 are the same type of investments. We simply have them tranched out. So Series 1, as a reminder, we started in May of 2017, and it is completely committed. So that portfolio is very much in a harvesting mode, and we've actually seen some very good distributions at the end of 2025 and particularly in 2026 with some good recent distributions that I will do a quick overview on. And then Series 2 is our newer tranche that we are still actively committing out of. And you'll see the returns there. And the portfolio is very much still committing, still investing. So a lot of the dollars going into the ground and given the early nature are held at cost. That portfolio obviously will continue to develop performance-wise and eventually distributions in the long run, as you've seen one generate return over time. So Q4 was a good quarter in terms of return generation and distributions. You'll notice that the Series 1 portfolio, the net multiple was taken up to 2 times from the 1.9 times at Q3. We also had about $3 million of net distributions in Q4. The exciting part of this portfolio is some of the distributions we've received even over the last month. We have sent back about, I want to say, let me pull up the exact numbers, about $12 million of capital just between kind of February and May within your portfolio. The biggest realizations coming from a couple co-investments and also some primary fund investments. One larger realization was through a private wealth platform where we actually received about 40% of the NAV liquidity through a continuation vehicle. So we still have some good upside on that investment where we will continue to receive distributions in the future. And then just recently, actually a couple weeks ago, we have exposure to an Italian technology company that IPO'd, and we were able to get some early liquidity from that IPO, which accounted for about a 2 times realization. However, the company, and we still have NAV of that company, which is over 10 times the investment. So excited about some of those realizations that have and will continue to see come through in your portfolio. As I said, Series 2 is still developing. There was a little bit of write-up from Q3 to Q4, but we will continue to see that as time moves on. When we think about Q1, we expect for buyout investments to be about par. Don't expect to see any huge real kind of movement in that part of the portfolio. Although I will say, and that's kind of based on our overall Neuberger platform, we do in the growth and venture portfolio expect to see more significant write-ups for Q1. And so hopefully overall for your portfolio, we'll see some nice write-ups in Q1 that we'll be able to talk about. We should have Q1 reports in the next few weeks. So I don't have final numbers to give you, but I think that's all trending in the right direction. If we turn to, let's see, page 12, this is an overall kind of performance analysis on Series 1, which again is the portfolio that we've completely committed and is really in the harvesting mode. You'll see the uptick in net TVPI I mentioned from 1.94 to 2 times. And you'll see how that portfolio is positioned against peers. So the benchmark, we're right at a first quartile IRR metric and a second quartile TVPI metric. And the good news is we continue to see upward movement there. So positive movements across the board. And when you look at page 13, this is Series 2, which I mentioned is still actively committing and investing capital. And we will be doing so for the next few years. So we'll continue to have investments go into the ground at cost. As a reminder, at the top of this page, you can see the primaries, secondaries, and co-investments and how they break out in terms of where we're committing capital. So about 54% so far have gone to primary fund investments, 4 to 5% to secondaries, and then co-investments, the remaining portion of that portfolio. Secondaries tend to have that early write-up, which we see here at 1.66 times, and with co-investments generating some early positive returns as well. Overall, the portfolio did go up slightly from 1.19 times at Q3 to 1.22 times. And we really expect that with some recent investments we've made over the last year, we expect Q1 to look pretty positive for Q1. I'm going to pause and see if there's any specific questions. I'm happy to answer anything on the overall portfolio or anything more specific.
Look like there are any questions. Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Go to 2C presentation, fourth quarter private markets, report by Nikita.
Hello, everyone. Thank you and good morning. Give me one moment while I'll go ahead and pull up the slides from our end. Great. Excellent. I'll go ahead and get started here. So we have our private markets report as of the end of the fourth quarter here, and I'll start here on page 1. This is our snapshot of the full program across the individual asset classes here. You can see that as of the end of the fourth quarter, $2.9 billion was committed. 2.3 of that has been contributed, and the remaining value was 1.5 billion about as of the end of the fourth quarter. The total program encompassing all the asset classes you see here has an IRR of 9.7% as of the end of this period. So nearly 10% for all the programs combined, a really good absolute result. And that number tends to not jump around much quarter to quarter, so it's fairly consistent with what we've seen over the past few quarters. I'll focus you to the right-hand side of the table here. You can see the IRR for each program, and then we also have a PME IRR column, and that measures the public market equivalent. So that is the benchmark return for a public market index of the appropriate asset class, reflecting cash flows that have come in and out of each program. If you go down the line here and compare each program to their PME, all but one are outperforming. So that's great to see. And I just wanted to highlight there. The one that's not is venture capital, which is a newer program, inception year of 2020. And so, as you know, private markets take several years to sort of have mature returns. And so venture capital is sort of in that bucket. But across the board, the other asset classes are performing quite well when compared to public markets. Jumping into private debt here on page 2, you can see the allocation as of the end of fourth quarter compared to policy. The allocation was about 4% relative to the policy target of 5%, so slightly below weight. The IRR in total, again, 7%, a healthy result for private debt. There are 2 new commitments made during the quarter, so Eagle Point Capital and GC Customer Value. Each of those commitments were in the amount of $28 million. You can see there. And then jumping to performance pages 5 and 6 list the individual partnerships. If you go up and down the line looking at IRRs compared to peers, as well as the DPI and TVPI numbers here, some really attractive returns for many of the underlying partnerships up and down the board. And again, a good result at a 7% IRR in total. And then finally, page 7, we look at the vintage year and geographic diversification. The program remains vintage year diversified appropriately, and the geographic focus largely in the U.S., but some sprinkled exposure throughout other regions as well. Jumping to the real assets program, this begins here in 2016, so relatively newer compared to private debt. The allocation was 3.3% as of the end of the fourth quarter, underweight versus that 4% target. But as you can see, that target or that allocation has sort of increased over time, climbing closer to 4%. The IRR for the program is 13.2%, so a really strong result from real assets, double-digit 13% IRR since inception there. And then again, this is an area that there's been recent activity, so 2 new commitments to highlight is Soraya Partners 2 and Tembo Fund 4 in commitment amounts of 17 and $12 million. And then finally, the performance pages here on 10, 11, and 12, you can see the individual partnerships. Again, a lot of really good results for the underlying individual partnerships. You can see here on page 12 that there's many here that are marked not meaningful. So those are newer commitments that don't have mature return results, sort of highlighting some of the recent activity over the past few years of newer commitments within the space. And again, a really good absolute result here of 13.2% IRR for the program in entirety. Exposure here, vintage year remains appropriately diversified, and a reminder on the geographic side, real assets tends to have a little bit more global tilt nature. So half of the exposures in North America, with a good chunk in global developed as well, and as well as a few other geographies listed here. Real estate here on page 14, the allocation was 4.6% as of the end of the fourth quarter, relative to that 4% target, so slightly overweight. That's been the case for the past few years, as you can see from the table here. The IRR in total was 9% for the program. No new commitments in real estate. In terms of returns, again, good results for many of the underlying partnerships. You can see here, there's been less activity within real estate. You can see that there's been sort of not as many commitments within the 2025 and 2024 range here, but again, a good absolute result so far for real estate with a 9% return IRR. And then again, appropriately diversified by vintage year and geographic focus. The final program I'll touch on is venture capital, newer program, 2020 vintage year. To start with, you can see the allocation has climbed over time. As of the end of the fourth quarter, 2.7% relative to that 4.5% target. So some healthy growth in terms of allocation. The IRR, again, 9.3%. So a good result for an earlier program that sort of needs time to mature. A newer commitment here, Tribeca Access 2, in the amount of $7 million over the quarter. And then again, we have performance for each of the underlying partnerships. And here on page 24, you can see a lot of the newer commitments still don't have mature returns. Those are my prepared remarks on the performance report. We have included our market update slides as well at the back of this presentation. for your pleasure. But we would be happy to take any questions on the performance report at this time.
Any questions for Colin?
Yes. So in the private credit, what typically is kind of the payback period for our investments?
That tends to have a shorter time frame. I would say probably 3 to 5 years. And I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, probably closer to the 3 to 5 year period, depending on the pace of the investments, but they generally do pay off more rapidly than other private investments.
Yeah, and maybe a question for Jay, as we look at maybe shifting more to fixed income, we consider private credit, using private credit as part of that bucket?
Yeah, it would definitely be under consideration. Sure, I could serve as an important piece of a diversified allocation overall. As you remember, we combined the different sectors into one multi-sector bucket. Down the road, there's potential to wrap in something like private credit as well, so that it all becomes one giant credit allocation. Just because, again, the market for credit is constantly changing, right? The lines between different sectors are always moving around, and we want to make sure that our investment officers are nimble enough to take advantage of the best opportunities there.
Any other questions for Colin and private markets? If there are none, we'll go ahead and go to 2D, first quarter results for the pension plan. Colin?
Absolutely. Thank you. Moving right ahead, we'll jump into the report for the pension plan as of the end of the first quarter. Here, I'll set the stage slightly with some index returns. Again, this report is as of the end of the first quarter, and so as you know, much has changed since then. But as of the end of the first quarter, you can see that a lot of the asset classes generally were negative in the first quarter. A lot of that has to do with the geopolitical tensions we were seeing at that time, as well as heightened inflation fears. So as a result, the S&P 500 was down 4.3%. MSCI ACWI down 3.2% for the first quarter. Bonds were flat, and the big winners for the first quarter were commodities, as a result of the geopolitical tensions, global energy prices, et cetera. And so the commodities index was the big winner at 24.4% for the first quarter. Again, this picture has flipped pretty drastically. Fast forward through nearly the end of the second quarter. A lot of the uncertainty around those geopolitical tensions, ceasefires in the Middle East, stabling of energy prices have really helped global indices. We've seen a resumption of the AI trade, some semiconductor names sort of seeming ahead, and so it's been sort of business as usual on that front, and global stock indices have recovered quite drastically. For the second quarter, the S&P 500 is up 15.4%, the ACWI up 15.7%, emerging markets up 27.7%, and bonds were up slightly, about 70 basis points. So a pretty starkly different picture than what we were seeing as of the end of the first quarter. And you can see those results in the estimates that Jay gave earlier for the plan. It's been a really strong second quarter so far, and that has helped those really strong fiscal year return estimates that he gave earlier. Jumping ahead to the performance report, we can get started on page 35. And we included a pretty robust report here that has a lot of slides, including an extensive executive summary that includes the manager watch list. Sort of the topic of the day has been some of the underperformance within public equity. So I just wanted to note that watch list is on our report. I won't get into great detail because Christina already sort of went through that in pretty great detail already, but I wanted to highlight that that's there. We have been working with staff throughout this entire process within the public equity, and we're supportive of the changes. We continue to re-underwrite the managers that are within the portfolio, as well as any potential replacements. And so I just wanted to reinforce what she was saying and sort of express our support through the entire process. Jumping to page 35, you can see the asset allocation for the pension or for the retirement plan as of the first quarter. assets were 5.879 billion, slightly down from the end of the fourth quarter as a result of negative investment returns as well as net outflows. But from a policy perspective, all asset classes are very close to policy across the board, as you can see from this chart. The next page show high-level returns for the total fund as well as underlying asset classes through the quarter. Down 80 basis points in the first quarter, but as you can see, relative to some of the benchmarks, sort of in line, if not protecting better than some of those listed there. Returns on an absolute basis across trailing periods continue to look really strong. Fiscal year to date period here was 5.7%. Again, that's advanced pretty dramatically over the rest of the quarter. 1 year, 12%, and 3 years, 9.5%. So in a period where we've seen really strong equity returns and strong returns from other asset classes generally, a really good absolute result through the end of this period as well. Again, the growth assets have really driven much of that return. You can see adding 6% fiscal year to date and 14.1% over the 1 year period. Some weakness in terms of returns relative to the benchmark. Again, a lot of that has to do with what we were talking about, or what Christina was mentioning earlier within public equity. Other assets as well as low beta have also returned well. Those asset classes are outperforming their benchmark over most periods and had positive absolute results. I'll point out here on this page, we show the peer rankings, and so that's the italic line sort of underneath the total fund there. Some good results compared to peers over most periods. I'll point out over that 5-year period, those returns rank in better than median over that period in the 39th percentile, so a good result relative to peers there. And I'll also mention that over all these periods, the standard deviation for the plan is mostly top quartile when compared to peers. We have several other pages for the performance report that I'd be happy to take questions on. This is really a high-level overview, just sort of picking out some of the broad themes. Happy to take any questions about anything going on under the hood at this point.
Any questions for Colin? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, 2E, first quarter performance reports for the Healthcare Trust.
Excellent. Moving right ahead, we included our same market update slides. I will pass over those quickly and jump to the performance report. Again, we've also included our executive summary and watch list here. But here on this page, you can see the asset allocation and the asset levels as of the end of the first quarter. $441.8 million in the health plan. As of the first quarter, all asset classes are fairly in line with policy, with the exception here being commodities. If you look down in the report later, commodities have had a really good run recently, like I mentioned. I think over the trailing year, the returns for that asset class were 36%. And so as of the end of the first quarter, that asset class has sort of shot over its target. Since the production of this report, that asset class has been rebalanced back to target. So just wanted to make that update, to let you know that update, and also say that all the other asset classes are sort of in line with where we would expect at this point. Jumping to performance here, you can see the healthcare trust has had a really good run of performance, adding 40 basis points for the quarter, 8.7% over the fiscal year to date period, and a really strong 15.9% period over the 1 year, 15.9% over the 1 year period relative to peers. Again, you can see with that italic row there underneath the total healthcare trust, returns rank in the top quartile over every single period. A lot of that is a result of the strong results within growth assets, specifically public equity. There's a lot of passive exposure in this fund as well. And so from both a absolute and relative perspective, returns have been really strong through this period. And that's sort of helped on an absolute level, but also compared to peers. Low beta and other assets have also done well. It's been a positive environment for most asset classes across the board, so you're seeing positive results from those as well. Any questions regarding the healthcare trust performance?
I have a question, but it's not really specifically about the healthcare trust.
Okay.
I guess looking at this report, I get the sense that the active managers past year hasn't done very well, just in the general sense. Is that a fair statement? And if so, what has been the primary reasons that you guys see as to why they haven't done as well as benchmarks?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great observation. I would agree with that. I think it's been a very challenging environment for active managers generally. And so we're seeing underperformance for many of them. I think a lot of the reason for that has to do with market concentration. Passive indices are market weighted for the most part. And so when you see certain concentrated companies have sort of outsized returns, it's been difficult for active managers that have discipline or constraints around the sizing to sort of keep up. There's also many of these active managers often have a quality component to them, which has really struggled in the past year. And so whether that be on the US side, globally, in EM as well, I think generally active managers have struggled to keep up if they're not invested to the same degree in some of these names that are really ripping across the passive indices that we're seeing. So I think that's a general kind of consensus.
Thank you.
Question for Colin? If not, thank you very much for those last four presentations.
Absolutely, thank you.
That'll take us to 2F, discussion and action on implementing revision to the asset allocations in KPS. I believe Ron's going to take that.
Yes.
Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, almost afternoon.
Okay.
Got my screen. At the May board meeting, the board approved the strategic asset allocation recommended by Nikita. The revised allocation consolidates the high yield, emerging markets, and investment grade bonds into the multi-sector bonds category, while maintaining the same target allocations. To memorialize the approved allocation, we are requesting approval of the revised allocation section of the IPS and the resolution number 4853. Any questions you may have?
Any questions for anybody? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Santos. Second by Gretchen. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
All right, so there is no old business. Go to new business for a oral update by CEO John Flynn.
Okay, I'm going to keep it short today. City Council approved the mayor's June budget last week and the budget appropriations this week. With these approvals, ORS headcount increased by 1 to 46 effective June 21st. Just a quick thank you to Benji and all the senior staff for creating a well thought out, reasonable budget. Also, Councilmember Casey and Vice Mayor Foley, the budget office, and the mayor's budget team for their support through the process. Earlier this week, I attended NCPER's Chief Officers Summit, where the discussion reinforced many of the themes that you're seeing or going to see in the strategic plan or our compilation of Vision 31, and how many boards are thinking about the same things, not just in San Jose, not just in California, but across the country. For staffing updates, I communicated to the board that Cynthia had her last day with ORS this past Friday, June 12th. I just wanted to take an opportunity to wish her well in her future endeavors and want to give her a personal thank you for the support that she provided me during my transition to not just ORS, but the San Jose cross-country commuting as well. So there'll be a big shoes to fill there. throughout the rest of the organization, we have interviews for our vacant information. We're setting up interviews for our vacant information system analyst position, targeted for July. We've had interviews for our vacant benefit position and hope to have that filled. Recommendations for it filled shortly. Recruitment for our benefits program manager and the deputy CIO positions that were recently approved will be as soon as administratively possible, once they become effective on June 21st. And then also, as we'll discuss on later in today's agenda, with our retirement or pending retirement of Sandra Castellano, our benefits division manager, we've got a request on today's agenda for the creation of or the approval to request an overstrength benefits manager position to facilitate the transition and having some significant overlap before that retirement. For governance and strategic planning, we've got some heavy agendas today, so I'm going to let those items speak for themselves, and we have a governance committee meeting after this meeting. Procurement, I think a note went out last week just to let you know that our previously catering agreement with specialties has expired. We've worked with the city to complete a competitive procurement process to expand catering options, and we're now working with these new vendors that were awarded as part of the city's process. The next police and fire member workshop is scheduled for Thursday, August 27th. We had a quarterly all-staff meeting on June 2nd where we discussed the board's strategic plan, the mission, the vision, and core values. We had representatives from HR to present deferred compensation to our employees, and ORS IT provided some insight guidance on prudent AI usage. Our annual summer picnic was held on Friday, June 5th. I'm pleased to share that Sherelle, our admin team, received the 2026 Directors Award. Sherelle was selected in recognition of her diligence and consistent willingness to go beyond the day-to-day responsibilities and her meaningful contributions to several important administrative team initiatives, including a heavy lift of our ADA compliance and our resolution project. And then just a reminder that ORS will be closed Friday, June 19th for Juneteenth, and Friday, July 3rd in observance of our nation's 250th celebration of Independence Day. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for John? All right, thank you, John. I'll take us to 4B, oral update by our council member, Casey.
I'll be brief. As John mentioned, we were able to approve the budget and resolve a $50.3 million shortfall, limited cuts to the employment staff, and there were roughly 20 cuts, with a number of those being reassigned to other positions. There is an update too on the project that I had mentioned the last time here at the FAY that the city took an equity position on. 20 police officers have, as of late last week, reserved space there. So we're hopeful there'll be many more, but as of Thursday, there's 20 of them in. So only a day.
Thank you. We covered 4C and 4D, which brings us to 4E, discussion and presentation of Division 31 ORS.
Give me a moment so I can share my screen. Okay, so I'm sure the board remembers that approved at the March meeting, the board's approved an updated mission statement that's a consolidated mission statement across both boards, which is great, a new vision statement, 5 core values, and then a strategic plan that encompassed 6 strategic themes, 6 goals, and 21 objectives. What I have been working with internally, along with senior staff, is the development of the administrative action plan that brings the strategic plan to life. I'm calling it Vision 31, taking a look at what we would like ORS to be like 5 years from now at the conclusion of this strategic planning period. The action plan is 35 initiatives across the 6 strategic theme areas that all flow between fiscal year 27 and through fiscal year 31. Some of the concepts in Vision 31 is members will know what to expect from ORS. Part of knowing what to expect from ORS is first, ORS needs to know what the members expect from us. So, bringing those together as some of the initial core initiatives will help inform the rest of the initiatives across the 5-year plan. The organization will be built to sustain this work. It's one thing to create more work. It's another thing to create it in a sustainable way. So we want to make sure that we have the depth of capacity that we need in order to deliver on these initiatives. We want to make sure that we retain the people that we need to deliver these initiatives, and without further overextending the people that we already have in this organization. As we were going through this, technology was a big part, and having grown up on the technology side, I've experienced many times where we implement technology for the sake of implementing technology, rather than having technology trying to meet a need or solve a problem. And so I think what's important is that we want to make sure that we're using technology, but we want to make sure it's through some deliberate, defined need and solving specific problems. And then lastly, of course, under the board's guidance, we want to make sure that you're able to govern with clarity and confidence. This includes making sure that we have structured onboarding, thoughtful education components, as well as just a very good governance review framework that we've already started to put in place. So 36 initiatives, 6 themes, 1 plan. It's ambitious. I think we know that going in. I can remember one of my first meetings. I think it was on the Federated side. We were talking about doing some of the procurements, and I said, we're going to get this done by June. And Julie Jennings, for those of you who remember Julie Jennings, said, "Do you really think that you can get this done in 3 months?" And I said, "Well, I can tell you for sure that if I say it's going to take 4 months, it's definitely not going to take 3 months." So, kind of keeping some of that in my mind, and then also balancing that with understanding that we need to have a plan, but also have some flexibility so that we can adjust to the needs that we can't even see on the horizon today. So the documents that were included on today's agenda include a narrative of the Vision 31. It's kind of some just thoughtful visioning for what 2031 might look like here at ORS. You have it's a PDF, but it's an Excel document that is kind of the details of each of these 35 initiatives. And then there's 2 visuals that you have printed out at your desk today with color-coded themes. Thank Amanda for some of the assistance in creating some of these visuals. One is just a view by grouping of the different themes, and then the other one is more of a timeline. Because as you can imagine, with 35 different initiatives, some have dependencies on others, and we needed to see how this laid out across time. And I think maybe my first version of this had 34 or 35 initiatives starting tomorrow. And so, obviously, we knew that would not be something that would be achievable. And so we started to try to lay that out a little bit more over time. In year 1, so today we're displaying and presenting and discussing the Vision 31, which includes those 35 initiatives, but also on the agenda for today is the approval for fiscal year 27's work plan, which include 20 different initiatives, that will be starting or completing this fiscal year, 7 that are already ongoing. So, there's already some stuff that we're doing because we are a well-functioning board and organization. We want to make sure that we give it space on the plan so that it shows that we're continuing to do that. And we're proposing to start all these some initiative in each of the 6 themes in year 1. And I've highlighted a few for priority from a priority standpoint. Not that these are necessarily more important than the others, but they have some criticality in some way because they often lead to some other initiative in the plan. We've already discussed today a little bit about the asset liability study. Kind of the nexus of the assets to liabilities and our actuarial components. 2.41 is the membership survey. So the thought process behind that is we want to reach out to our membership. We did, as part of the strategic plan, we reached out to components of the membership, leaders of the unions, leadership of some of the retiree organizations, but we didn't go out to each member. So we want to hear from them. What is it that they want from us? How do they want to be communicated with? What do they want from a self-service component to help formulate the details of the strategic initiatives that will come after it? And then I think the next two, the next one is somewhat related to the membership survey, and that we want to know how and what they want to be communicated with, but then also developing some of that capacity inside of the organization. Right now, we outsource our small communication plan, and it makes sense because it is small and isolated. But if we're going to create a more comprehensive communication plan, both with our communications with our memberships, engagements with our membership, the development of some of the training materials, both for the membership and for the board, we need some additional support internally, and taking a look at that as compared to continuing a deeper outsource model. And a very similar conversation with our legal services. So, when we went through our procurement for our legal services, one of the contemplations was this might be a good time in the maturity of the plan and the organization to look at insourcing some of our legal capacity, taking a look at our general counsels as a position, as a specific component, and whether or not that makes sense from a cost standpoint, whether that makes sense from a capacity, number of hours worked. And now that we've got a year under our new contract, we have some good data, I think, that can help us inform a recommendation. And then lastly, the priority item, our budget policy review. Later on today's agenda, we're going to ask you to formulate a ad hoc budget committee with the end goal of helping to develop and recommend to the full boards an updated budget policy. I think every plan has its risks, and we can only develop from where we're sitting today and the components of the horizon that we can see. So I thought it'd be good just to voice a few here. The external environment I mentioned here specifically. Generally, we're always keeping a look at what's changing at the federal, the state, and the local level. La Sarah versus the County of Los Angeles is something that comes to mind, something we've discussed before. Plan execution. Some of these initiatives require the completion of the prior initiative before we can start or fully inform the next initiative. And so if something takes significantly longer, we may need to adjust the plan or the order on which we execute. And then the known unknowns, known and unknown turnover. This organization's has had its fair share of turnovers. The benefits division manager transition is, in the end of this year is going to be a heavy part of the risk associated with being able to deliver on this plan. But I think with the governance structure that we're putting in place, we're going to stay on top of it. We're going to keep you informed, and we'll be able to shift as we need. which comes to how does the board stay connected and have oversight on what we're doing here. The proposal is that we would do a written quarterly report to include on the board agendas as part of the fourth quarter, and the review of the current annual plan and the approval of the next annual plan. We'll do a formal presentation to the boards, as well as ensuring that all of these goals and strategic initiatives ultimately become part of the executive performance evaluation. But below that, it feeds into the rest of the organization's goals and objectives. So we're kind of all rowing with the same sets of goals in mind. It's just that depending on where you are in the organization, you may have a more narrow view of what your goals and objectives are, but all tied to the organization's strategic plan. And then, of course, if something materially breaks or materially changes, we won't wait for a quarterly written report or the fourth quarter review with the boards. We'll bring that to as part of a normal board discussion and potential action if needed. So with that, I'm happy to go into any details across any of the documents. There wasn't an easy way for me to kind of put that into the presentation, but if you had questions about initiatives or timing, priorities, I'm willing to bring up any document you need.
Any questions for John? Not, I know the next agenda item is heavy of this, what we just went over.
This says discussion and action. I think it's the action to accept it. This one should be just discussion and presentation. The next one is gotcha.
Now we'll just go right into the next one, which should go a little more in detail, looks like.
All right. I can't see that. So the next item on the agenda is the annual work plan. So as part of the first year's work plan, we have 20 active initiatives, 7 that will be ongoing. An example of an ongoing initiative would be our governance review framework, right? That's something that we worked with the governance committee earlier this year to put together this review framework. So that's something that's on the plan that's going to continue. So that's one of the 7, not one of the 20. Some of the I hate to say easy, but low-hanging fruit, maybe I'll say, is the governance over the strategic plan, right? So some of that governance and review structure that I just discussed, that's one of the items that we want to fully develop and work through in the first year. The recruitment and onboarding of our new benefit program manager and DCIO positions that were just approved by City Council, and we'll start the recruiting and onboarding. Those are things that of course we're fully engaged with, and some that are already in progress. So Jay and I met with Makita and Chiron to start putting together the timeline process that we've already discussed earlier today, as well as the investment compensation study, right? So while 20 sounds like a very large number in addition, but some of the work is already in progress. We're just capturizing, formalizing it in a way that brings vision to the boards and the public. So I'm happy to go into any detail. The work plan is organized by theme. My goal is not to present eye charts here with the Excel spreadsheets or the detailed Gantt charts in some ways. That'll be how we manage internally. But from a board perspective, these are the list of the initiatives that we're going to be focusing on. Again, quarterly, you'll get an update on where we are for each one of these items, whether or not we believe we're red, yellow, or green to be able to meet the delivery date of these items. And then anything that changed since the last time, there'll be an area for discussion on risks or changes.
Any questions for John?
I have a couple of comments and changes. First of all, I love the project plans. I really like the idea of taking all these initiatives, especially now, given that you have the opportunity. And I really like the success measures that you have in one of the spreadsheets, because I think one of the keys is trying to track how you're doing and whether or not, what is success when you have all these initiatives. My question is, to what extent do we have, and I assume you have buy-in from staff and all the people, and you mentioned what it was called, the relationship between completing these tasks and then the executive performance. Is there any relationship with the performance for the employees as well? Is this all tied together? Because there's a lot of tasks and a lot of objectives, and I assume they overlap, but I didn't know what the relationship was.
Sure. So the way the performance evaluation process works is very shortly here, we're going to be starting to do evaluations for the prior year. As part of that process, we also set goals and objectives for next year. And so while I would say there may have been isolated cooperation depending on who the manager was, now we're going to have something that will tie directly up. So I will work with, I'll use you as an example, Barbara. I apologize. Here are the initiatives that we're going to be working on this year. Here's where Barbara or anyone in her organization will have responsibility. And then Barbara will then include that in her team's responsibilities, and then so on and so forth down the line. They don't come up to the board. That's all handled internally. The only thing that would be handled at the board level would be the CEO and CIO.
Great. And then so all these, and every year it gets reviewed, or every year it gets incorporated into the next performance review for staff and so forth.
That evaluation process happens every year.
Okay, great, thank you. I think it's a great project.
Yeah, and it's when we had to define what the success measures were. That's when people sort of we get a little sweaty, right? Because I think, to your point, that's where you get to be held accountable, right? And part of our core values is just accountability. And when I think that gives us a very strong way at the end of this to say, this is where we are, this is where we exceeded, and this is where we fell short. Not, and then the opportunity to figure out how to both adjust the plan, but then also to adjust expectations, right? So I have big eyes around the dessert table. I also have big eyes around strategic initiatives, and so we're gonna put our best foot forward here.
Great. Well, thank you.
Any other comments or questions for John? If not, the annual strategic work plan does need a motion. Motion by Santos.
Second.
Second by Gretchen. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, John. Go back to you one more time. Discussion and action to approve a one full-time overstrength benefit division manager through January.
Sure. Just shift my notes here. Okay, so we've mentioned a few times today, a few times in some past meetings, kind of getting ready for the request to come to the boards. I know based on conversations with Sandra and planning to lead up to this point that Sandra is giving us a retirement date for the end of the year. Technically, it's January 2nd of next year, but we'll round it up. The way the infrastructure works here, we can't recruit for a position until that position is empty. And this position is too important from an organizational standpoint to have a break-in service of one of the senior managers of the organization overseeing one of the largest areas of ORS. So the request in front of you is to approve, or really to approve recommendation to the city administration for the overstrength benefits manager position. This is a temporary position. That position will be through Sandra's retirement date, January 2nd, 2027. And what this will allow us to do, the way this would technically work is once this position, this overstrength position is established, Sandra would be moved into that overstrength position, therefore creating a vacancy in a permanent position. That would then allow us to recruit for a permanent benefits division manager. Once that person we go through a competitive recruitment process, that person is onboarded, and then they'll have, our hope is at least 3 months of overlap with Sandra, and hopefully a little bit more. I don't think it's reasonable to ask for more, nor do we have where we are technically. Do I think we could reasonably get any more with our two constraints? And I think the benefits that we get from this is it's twofold. One is we know that when the leader of an organization or part of the organization leaves, it creates this anxiety and angst within the teams that person manages. And that's no different than if it's a CEO or a benefits division manager. And so we want to make sure that we address the needs of the staff by knowing this person and giving them that soft transition time. Secondly, we want this person to be successful. This position is ORS is a fairly complicated benefit structure. 11 different tiers, 3 different plans in many components of from that perspective. It's not an easy position to wrap your hands around those details, and so we want this person to be successful when they onboard, because the only thing worse than one transition is to have 2 transitions. And so I respectfully ask the board to approve this. I just want to just double check the cost so I can read it out. The anticipated loaded cost is $123,500. I think that assumes a September 1st. I think it's a September 1st start for the position. And then this is split between both boards. I think that's money well invested. We believe, based on the current projections of staffing vacancies, that we will be able to absorb that into the fiscal year budget. But being so early in that process, it's a little hard to know. But I'll bring back a mid-year discussion around the time that Sandra's leaving, if we believe that there's a concern that we won't be able to make that budgetary gap.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion by Santos, second by Votto. Any further questions or comments? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. 4H, discussion and action on formation of the ad hoc budget committee.
Okay. So in alignment with the work plan that we just approved, asking to approve a formation of a joint ad hoc budget committee. So we know that in order to have an ad hoc committee, it needs to be for a specific purpose, and that purpose is to review the administrative budget cost allocations, benchmarking, and the development of updates to our budgeting policy as recommendations to the boards for approval. We know it has to be for a defined timeline. That timeline, I'm saying it's at the approval of next year's budget by the city. Although most of the work will be done in delivery to the boards by December, just want to have that committee there in case there are some unforeseen questions or circumstances that we need to work through once we start the city's budgeting process with our updated policy. And then lastly, you need to define who will sit on this committee for you jointly with the Federated Committee. asking for 2 committee members, just so that we can have a robust discussion as part of the committee and support once, when recommendations come back to the board.
Chair, I make a motion at chair's discretion to approve this to a point.
Okay. Santos has a motion for me to appoint. Just to let you know, I was going to make a recommendation for Gretchen, if she would be able to join as governance chair, and then also if Franco would be willing to be part of the ad hoc committee.
Let's say.
Look on Frank's
Hasn't
face.
responded.
I know. I saw that look in his eyes. Are you willing to amend that motion? Okay, and I will second it. Or actually, sorry, Eshwar did second it. Any further discussion?
Franco says no, I'll volunteer.
I'm good. You sure? Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we covered retirement, so that brings us to committee. 7-1, President Committee.
Our last meeting was in April, which we covered in our last board meeting. The next meeting is in August, where we'll have a very full agenda.
Yes. All right, thank you. 7-2, audit.
We had a pretty full meeting on May 21st. We have some action items that we'll discuss in a minute. We talked about travel and attendance, external audit plan, amendment to the agreement with Baker Tilly, risk assessment results, and a proposed 5-year internal audit plan from Baker Tilly, and discussion on internal audit recommendations and penetration testing. We have some action items that we need to go over. I'll pick it over to John to talk about this.
Great. Any questions before we go into 4C or 6?
I think we need to formally accept the minutes.
Yeah, well, we go ahead and receive and file minutes for the audit committee of February 19th, 2026. And so that brings us to C, discussion and action on fiscal year 2025-26.
Sure, I'll briefly introduce this. I believe we have NGO on the line. And this is the standard fiscal year 26 external audit plan by NGO. NGO is our independent financial auditor. They presented the audit plan to the committee. Now the committee is making that recommendation for approval by the boards. If you don't have any detailed questions, we could take a motion, or if you have detailed questions, we're happy to go through.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second.
Or approve.
Motion by Woosley, second by Santos. For the discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? 4D.
4D. Just as a reminder, Baker Tilly is our internal auditor that we've outsourced our internal audit function to. Now that we have, I guess it's about a half year under our belt with them, they had made some recommendations to update the agreement to better align the deliverables and some of the tasks associated to the contract, as well as to create an administrative task to handle some of the time and materials based work of administration. I think the important thing to note here is there's no change to the not to exceed number, so the not to exceed number stays the same. It's really just a realignment of the tasks in the agreement.
Any discussion? Question?
Move to approve.
Motion by Woosley, second by Santos. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, brings us 7-3, governance. Trustee Flicker.
I think we just
Did I miss one?
sorry.
I apologize.
You know, words.
Discussion and action on the proposal internal audit plan.
Great. I believe we have somebody from Baker Tilly online.
Yes, hello, Stacy Gill here. I do have a presentation to share. It is showing that I'm not able to share my screen. That's been disabled.
Yes, you can.
You should be able to do it now.
Great. Okay, great. Good afternoon. Chair and board members, I am going to present the results of our agency-wide risk assessment and our proposed fiscal year 27 internal audit plan for ORS. The risk assessment was conducted by Baker Tilly, and this is really what serves as the foundation for a 5-year internal audit roadmap. So I'm going to briefly summarize our approach, highlight the key results, and walk through the proposed projects for fiscal year 27. I'll begin with some background on the engagement and the risk assessment methodology that we use, and then we'll review the overall results and explain how those results were used to develop the proposed 5-year audit plan. And then lastly, I'll discuss the projects proposed for fiscal year 27 and conclude with any questions from the board. You should have received both the summary memorandum and the full risk assessment report in advance. So I'm going to keep my remarks at a high level and then reserve time for discussion afterwards. As part of the duties as the outsourced internal auditor, we performed the agency-wide risk assessment and developed the 5-year audit plan from that. So that covers fiscal years 27 through 2031. The purpose of the assessment is to identify areas that present the greatest risk to the agency and to help ensure that, with kind of our limited audit resources, that we're focusing on those areas that are going to provide the most value. And in the context of audit planning, risk refers to the possibility that an event or condition could impact ORS's ability to achieve its objectives. So our process began with developing or validating an audit universe, as we call it, which is essentially just a complete inventory of the major functions and activities across ORS. And then risks were identified for each of those and evaluated within those areas. Our assessment is completed in 4 phases. So the first one, we conduct planning activities, interview key stakeholders that included board members, audit committee members, management, and staff. And then next, we gathered and reviewed supporting information like prior audit reports, strategic documents, budgets, organizational information. And then we analyze the identified risk by evaluating both the likelihood of a risk occurring and the potential impact if it were to occur. And those 2 factors were combined to create an overall risk score for each of the functional areas. And then lastly, those results were documented and used to develop the proposed audit plan with priority given to the highest risk areas. So as I mentioned, kind of the, auditable functional areas that we identified, there were 46 of those across the agency. And this table on this slide and the next slide summarizes those areas, the associated risk ratings, and kind of shows, that final risk score. So again, these are risks that, we had evaluated based on the likelihood of occurrence and the impact that it would have to the organization. In getting those risk scores, we can then, rank those high to low to get a prioritized listing as we're showing here, and use that to develop a proposed audit roadmap. So you'll kind of see the highest risk areas are in red at the top of the list, and that's sort of where we identified the key focus areas for fiscal year 27. So
Give me this one real quick.
Okay. Just what does a risk score of 20, for example, mean? I know you can see it relative to others, but in an absolute sense, what degree of risk is this? I mean,
So the way that we conduct the risk assessment is we've got criteria that we use to rate the likelihood of a risk occurring and the impact. So I believe those were in the packet or the detailed risk assessment report, but based on that, we kind of have numbers that represent the impact and numbers that represent the likelihood. And by kind of, multiplying those, we get a final risk score. So it's sort of that balance of both of those factors that determine where that falls kind of within the high to low spectrum of risk level. So if you're looking at this and you can kind of see that we've sort of colored those based on the range of what we would consider low, medium, and high risk.
Casey, just as a clarifying question, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a concern that something is being done wrong in those areas. It's just based on the potential impact and the potential of it happening. That's how the risk score is generated, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, this is based on what we call the inherent risk. So we do not consider current operations, controls that are in place. This is just truly any potential risk that exists within these functions. If those were to happen, what the impact and what the likelihood would be. So this is not saying that there's gaps or significant issues in these areas. It's truly just representing, hey, based on the inherent nature of these functions, this is their risk level.
Right, Stacy, just one point of clarification. What is the max number? So I know where 20 sits. Is the max score something much higher than 20?
That's a good question. I would need to pull up our risk scale to calculate those, but if it's based on we have different scales that we use in different cases. Potentially it would be 25. So if we're using the scale where it's the highest likelihood is a 5 and the highest impact critical is a 5, then that would be a 25. But again, that would be within the detailed risk assessment report. We would have those scales in there, probably in the appendix.
All right, well, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so based on that, we have 2 projects that we are proposing for fiscal year 27. One is an advisory engagement and one is an internal audit. So the advisory project is related to 1099 reporting, which came up as the highest risk area. So during the risk assessment process, management had identified, the upcoming IRS reporting changes as one of the most immediate operational risks facing the organization. So this engagement is intended to evaluate the design and effectiveness of controls surrounding the reporting process, and that includes the implementation of a new third-party vendor, looking at data accuracy, filing requirements, and regulatory compliance considerations. And then the second project we've got here is an audit of investment manager reconciliation and the related investment accounting controls. So that audit would focus on controls over investment valuation and financial reporting, the accuracy and completeness of information that's being received from investment managers, timeliness of the close process, and the identification and resolution of variances. So again, together, these projects address key risks identified through the assessment process and is something that we saw as a balanced focus on both the regulatory compliance and financial reporting sides. So that does conclude my presentation. So again, the fiscal year 27 proposed audit plan reflects the results of the risk assessment and focuses on where we see kind of the greatest risk currently and where these audits and projects could provide the greatest value to ORS. So I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Any questions for Dr. Tilly and Stacy? Not. Take a motion.
Yeah, move to approve.
We got a motion by Woosley, second by Santos. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right. Try the second time. With 7.3 governance. Trustee Flicker.
We have not had a meeting since our last meeting. We are meeting this afternoon, so we'll have more free time.
You. 7.4 disability. Trustee Santos.
Well, we had great meetings always, thank you, the committee. We have this panel, good staff, and Course said we're gonna be a hard person to replace. And there's no meeting in July, August 10th will be our next meeting.
All right, thank you. And we'll go ahead and receive and file the minutes for May 11th, 2026. And bring GPCs.
Last meeting was April 1st, so we haven't met since our last meeting. August 18th is next one.
Thank you. Any proposed agenda items for August?
Yeah, speed things up.
On the average, we're still doing pretty
Yeah, I think hour meeting last month. No, if there's no other proposed agenda, this means adjourned. Thank you, everybody.